Hi everybody. Yeah, thank you so much for your patience. As you may have read on the announcements board or in the email I sent out, that I was a little bit under the weather yesterday. I'm feeling much better today, so we'll get started. So in this particular assignment, you were taking one of the color palettes from the previous assignment, and you're creating a design where you were thinking about the term that you used, the adjective to describe the colors and the colors themselves, and you were placing it into a design so that you were sort of using like shapes and form in a way that would dovetail with the theme or the mood, you could say, of your palette. Okay, so that's what we're going to look at here and see how that works together and maybe provide some suggestions for how you can keep moving it in that direction. One of the other things we looked at too is back in the previous task, we talked about when you created your palette that you were going to be thinking about how there would be one hue that would really be the hue that did the heavy lifting in terms of that adjective. So if you had peaceful, for example, what hue did you choose to create that? And then the other hues, whether it was a triad or a tetrad, they would be the accent colors. So we'll also look at that too. How can we really get the dominant color expressing the mood of your particular color palette in your design. So we're kind of putting it all together here to see how we can work with it. Okay, so let's get started. Let's see. So in yours, your theme was aggravated. I think it has an A in there instead of an I right here. My spelling is not the best, but yeah, maybe Google that. But in any case, so aggravated really, has that kind of like frustrated, tension, conflict kind of thing. And I think it seems to me like you chose red as the dominant color, like that would express that theme. And I think that was a good choice. And in your design, you really used a lot of red, which I think is very good because that's, going to be the color that's going to be important in your design. And you've used these other colors here to express the accent colors, like the blue. It looks like you've got a little yellow and maybe some green in there, or maybe it's just yellow. I don't know. I'd have to go check your previous color harmony. But yeah, so, and I think so, it looks to me too like you've got kind of a lot of a clash of shapes, which I think is really expressing aggravation, and also kind of a lot of this energy that moves upwards. It's almost like a volcano that's exploding, that's very aggravated. So I think those are all really good choices to express your theme. So I think you're really on the right track here. And so I would just say the only thing that I would work on a little bit more here is maybe experimenting with Unity. Um, I have a PDF that I've been sharing, but I'm going to actually share, maybe take a look at one of the examples here that might be useful for other folks too. Hold on just a moment. So this is the PDF called Design Tips, and there's just a few really interesting tips in here. And this one in particular, I think is really useful. I think actually could be useful for a lot of folks once we get into more like where you can, if you remember back in week 1 and 2, where we were working just with circles, just with squares, if you remember those assignments, those were naturally unified because the same shape was unified. And then we also unified with color. We had a color harmony that we were using, which is a great way to unify. So we still have a color harmony in this particular assignment, but because we have more options here to work with shapes, what can happen is when you use maybe too many shapes, you get a lack of unity. And so just by simply reducing the amount of shapes you use, so in this case, so we've got, wow, I don't know how many shapes do we have here. One, two, three, four. Well, I'm going to say these are maybe similar, but we could count them separately or the same. But we have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7 shapes, maybe more. And that creates a sense of disunity or, where everything, it kind of like falls apart. Whereas in this side, we're using some of the same shapes, but we've omitted some shapes, and you can see it's way more unified, you know? So repeating shapes rather than adding new shapes is often the way to go, you know? So in this one, we've got two shapes. Is that it? And yet it looks very interesting, doesn't it? It's still, and the reason why it looks so interesting is because that the shapes have been played with, you know, in different ways. They're different sizes. You know, they kind of are overlapping and joining together to kind of create new shapes. So you can do a lot with the same shape. Okay, so I wanted to mention that. I think we'll come back to this PDF in just a minute. But so in yours, what I would say is maybe just reduce the number of shapes that you have. Like you know, you could consider this beautiful swirly shape as one of your shapes, you know, and so all of the swirls is one shape, and then you've got the kind of diagonal shapes in here. Then you've got the star shapes. So, and then, well, you could even say this is another shape right here, this big shape. But you know, maybe reducing the number of shapes. Like maybe you could take out the stars, or maybe take out these. I kind of like these. I don't know. Maybe these could work. But you know, with these ones, what I might do with these is maybe make them a little lighter or brighter so that they stand out a little bit more. You know, because right now they feel like they're getting a bit lost. So I would just play with it a little bit more. I love having the blue in the background. I think that's a great choice, the dark blue, because it makes it appear like a deeper space, and it brings everything, you know, gives clarity to the whole design. Okay, so that's it. I think you've done a nice job here at really trying to convey your mood through shapes, which is what we're trying to do here. Or through shapes and colors, I should say. And, okay, so I'm not able to see it. Let me see if I can get your design up here because it's a GIF. There it is. Okay, good. Okay, so in your design, yeah, you know, this is, so here is your harmony. And what is your term? So take your term and write it in here, whatever that was from your previous task. I don't remember what it was, but let's actually, you know what? I have it saved on my computer. Let's look here. Serene. All right, so that's your term. So that's yeah, purple. You know, purple is a nice cool color that does have cool colors. All are kind of in that sort of serene category, aren't they? I like to think of them as introverted colors, you know, as opposed to the extroverted colors of the warm colors. And so I think you've done a nice job here at expressing that sense of serenity. Now, I'll tell you why. What is it about that serene? Well, first of all, you've used a lot of purple here, which is good. So the largest area of your design is definitely dominant. And then you've used accent colors here just at the bottom, you know, to bring in the rest of your harmony, which is great. And the other thing that makes this serene is that even though you've got a lot of sort of activity going on, you've arranged it in horizontal lines. You see that, everybody? There's a horizontality to it. That always promotes that kind of sense of like doing something like that. What does that refer to? It refers to the landscape, because, you know, the landscape is flat, like it's, or, you know, the horizon line, I should say, because landscapes can be different. But it's like that sort of stability of being on the ground. And so in general in design, when we want to create a sense of stability, we often will do like horizontal lines, you know? So vertical lines that go up and down, they're more powerful. So this has a little bit of both, but I would say the horizontal line is definitely an important part of it. So yeah, I think this looks really good. So the only thing I would say here that you want to do is just add your term. So that should be easy. If you can't copy and paste it from your other design, just, you know, type it in here in your document, and I think you're done. Okay. Oh, and I'd be remiss if I didn't remind you again to turn this into a JPEG so that you can, you know, get full points for presentation. The pen tool does take a lot of work, doesn't it? I think that, you know, it's definitely more of an advanced tool. Not required for this assignment either. You know, you could definitely just kind of keep working with circles, you know, or other geometric shapes, and just kind of use overlapping or, you know, different types of techniques for that. But in any case, let's see. Definitely, yeah, contemporary hotel. I agree with you. I think this really does have that quality. Yeah, so yours is fall colors. And yeah, I like how you have emphasized more of the fall colors in here because I think because it's abstract and I don't know when I think of fall, I'm not sure if I think of a particular shape in mind. Do you know what I mean? Like I think your swirling shapes work uh, because I don't, maybe not like hard geometrics. I don't know, but in any case, I think that it sort of has this organic quality, which I think is very nice when you're referring to nature. And then you're, starting to emphasize more of the fall colors. I think you could maybe emphasize the fall colors even more, potentially. Like some of these traditional, like some of these earthier colors, maybe put them in there. Maybe like a little bit less of the teal, although I like a little bit of teal in there. I think that's important. But maybe you've got like two big shapes here that are teal. Maybe you could, maybe insert something that's more fall-like in there. Um, Maybe you could have a few more swirls. You could do swirls within swirls, or just play with it, and so you can get a little bit more, change in your colors a little bit. Like you could play with more from your swatch. Yeah, but I think it's yeah definitely definitely is creating that sense of fall, and I think you're using your colors effectively to promote that. Okay, Robert. Yeah, creating organic shapes can be challenging, but I think you did a really nice job with this. One of the things too with digital work is once you've created one shape that you like, you can just, copy and paste it, change the size, do different things with it, which I think it looks like what you're doing here. So I think you've done a nice job here at creating the sense of love in your design, both from the form you've created. And I think abstract, when you have something in nature, when you abstract it like this, I think it looks really good graphically. You know what I mean? Like that's what a lot of patterns are made out of. A lot of design is created from nature where it's just kind of abstracted, where like the details are removed and you just get sort of basic shapes. Um, so I think it's working well. The only thing I would work on this a little bit more is just maybe in terms of the design just a little bit. So that takes us to actually another one of these really good. This is, I think I may have been posting the wrong PDF, but previous in the class. But there's, let's see, cropping. Oh, I think it's earlier. Okay, so cropping. Cropping is something that's so easy to do and it makes a really big difference in your design. So this is the before version where you can see all of the shapes are just coming to that edge of the design but not going over. As if you like kept everything within the lines, drawing, coloring within the lines. Whereas what happens with cropping, you can see this is the same design. Let me just move this up a little bit. It's exactly the same design. The only thing that is different is the placement in relation to the edges. It's just, in this case, it's just made bigger so you can crop it. And it kind of creates a more interesting composition, doesn't it? It has what's called a point of entry that draws the viewers in. Like you can see, you can kind of move in from the side into these spaces. Um, and cropping is really interesting too. It's something that I think the more you go further in design, whatever type of design it is, the more you will find yourself automatically cropping. A good exercise is to just take your camera and when you are taking a photograph, experiment with cropping. Like the same subject and see how you can take kind of like a very sort of, basic photograph, but with a little cropping. Suddenly you can really make things just so much more sort of elevate the design. So that's what I would do here. I would do a little more cropping with your design, maybe adding in, a few more of these shapes. Maybe you could overlap them, maybe make some big or small if you like, just kind of experiment a little bit more with the design. Delta. Okay, so this is a really interesting design. One of the things you want to include here is your color palette and that word, that adjective, descriptive color from the previous assignment. Now there is in the tutorials for task 2 for this assignment, whether it's for Photoshop or Illustrator, it will actually walk you through how to use those swatches, and actually there's a template in there that you can use So take a look at that. Let me actually go back to your task 1 and see what you were working with. Quiet. So, and this was your um, triad. But okay, so take a look at my feedback from the previous assignment. I mentioned that, you know, this is actually, you want to work, this is going to be a triad. So go back to my feedback and, you know, make sure to correct this before Wednesday, before the final submission due date, before you submit it. So you make sure that you're on track with your triad. Okay, so quiet, yeah. And again, pay attention to my feedback. I've got some other notes in there. But yeah, I like this design. I think it is starting to get a quiet sense with all of the, you know, the grid is often a very quiet kind of design because it's so kind of ordered, you know, especially if you have a grid that's very horizontal and very vertical. And I think also these shapes in here are sort of nice and soft and they kind of promote a sense of quietness. Um, so yeah, the only thing I would work on with this one here is I would put a color behind the white here. You know, once you change your triad, correct your triad. I'd put a color behind there so that, can you see how what's happening here is we lose the edge here? You see that? There's no edge. And that's easy to, again, that's easy to fix, and it also really can help with your design, you know, with the colors of your design, to have one of the colors back there, because it brings, it instead of this breaking off from your color harmony, it'll then be included in it. Um, and I think that's the main thing. I may play with this circle a little bit. Somehow this little circle doesn't feel like it's quite included yet. Maybe do you need the circles? I don't know. They're kind of nice. But I would play with the circle part a little bit, maybe a little bit more. Um, yeah, I think it's a really interesting design. So if you bring it online, with regard to it being triadic, and work on your presentation, uh, in terms of getting your, you know, your palette in here, then I think you'd be right on track. Yes, you know, it is true that in this particular composition or exercise, we are a little bit limited in the swatches we're using. If you were, you know, working on this yourself, you know, you would just kind of like look at the swatch, like the colors from your harmony, whether in this case triad or tetrad, and you could work with any of the values or saturations of those hues, and it would be, of course, it would be an accurate color harmony. And then further down the line, you know, you could, of course, which is I think what a lot of people do, is they have a general idea of the colors they're using and they just work on it, and they don't think necessarily, is this a harmony, you know, one of the harmonies we're studying. They just work kind of intuitively with color. And I think what most people find is that it ends up being a harmony, but they're not necessarily kind of dialed into that. By sort of which to say there's different levels of working, you know, working with color. And we're just trying to get an idea of working with a harmony like this, like a strict harmony, and also, you know, with a more limited palette. But again, once you're on your own, whatever you want to do is of course fine. Um, okay, yes, so good. So you've worked with the idea of cold, and you've worked with a lot of blue, which is great. You know, this is your dominant color definitely here, and you've also got these kind of cooler colors in here as well. You know, the yellow we think of as being, well, I guess, is this yellow or is this, I think this is yellow, yeah? Yeah, I think this is, but I was gonna say it can really look a lot cooler when you desaturate it or make it darker. Um, yeah, so what I would say in this one is just, you know, a couple things. One, I would try cropping this as well. You know, like maybe making your tree a little bit bigger. Maybe it could sort of come off the page a little bit, so to speak. I think that could look really good, you know, bring in the viewer a little bit more. Maybe make these little swirls maybe a little thicker, maybe even a little lighter, you know, so there's more contrast. You know, and if you want to go back and this is true for everybody, if you find that there's some color that you just really need from your palette, like in this case, I think this is this color from here. You know, if you need a lighter version of it for your design, just go back into your previous design, your task, and just tweak it, make it lighter, and revise, you know, revise it. That's fine to work back and forth. Okay, yeah, I think that's the main thing here is just, you know, kind of working a little bit more on the composition with making your positive spaces a little bit more. And that's the other thing that cropping does. I think I still have this up. One of the things cropping can help you do is you have a space issue, like where you've got a lot of negative space or too much negative space. By cropping, automatically you will enlarge your foreground, and that can often really balance things out quite a lot. Okay, and all right, so in your design, let's see, parallel dimensions. You know, it almost has like a sort of very mental, conceptual quality to it, you know, where it's about this alternate reality. So I like the way that you have worked with, you know, these kind of like diamond shapes and this kind of floating space. I think that's a nice way of working with it. And it looks like you've chosen maybe the cool color for your dominant color. You know, the one that's sort of carrying the message here, and then this is your background. So I think that looks good. And I would just say, you know, a couple things. I think that you could, one of the things that I think a lot of people do in design is they start off with a lot of ideas, you know, and then as they work through, what they might do is start taking out the non-essential elements. You know, and like in your case, I think that this and the background really are the important things. And then this little detail and this little detail feel like they're afterthoughts, or they're part of maybe, you know, a draft phase, that you could take those out, you know, like, because I don't know if they quite fit. They're just like maybe part of another design that could be completed, you know, and that's what sometimes people will do. They'll take these elements and they'll maybe move them and generate them into another design. So I would just take those out. And then the other thing I would work on a little bit is cropping your design, like this, like elements. So maybe you'd have one more that kind of, you know, overlapped and was so big and kind of came out down here. You know what I mean? Like you just kind of repeat down this train. I think maybe that's all you need to do here. Um, and then, okay, so here's what you need to do. Then I'm seeing why you did this now is because you have the green color here and you wanted to include that green in your design, right? So maybe there's something you could do. So you like, well, I'll put it right here. So maybe you could somehow add the green somewhere else. Like maybe it could just be one of these, you know, you could add another little kind of stripe here that could be the green, or maybe there could be a little tiny kind of stripe here, you know, just kind of little accent that you could add in a couple different places. With your accent colors, you don't need a lot of them, you know, in terms of the space in your design. You could just have a touch here or there. But in general, you want to have it at least more than one place so that it also unites in your design. So maybe you could have it like a few different spots, but in really small quantities. Okay? All right, well, just keep going. Minette. All right, so let's see. I think you worked with your triad with imperturbable. And yeah, in this design, so when we look up the definition of imperturbable, let's actually do that, because I think that it is, again, like I mentioned earlier, it's not a word that most people are use very often, but it is a really interesting word. And here is the definition. It's unable to be upset or excited, calm, tranquil, self-possessed, composed, calm, cool, cool-headed, unexcitable, even-tempered, placid, and so forth. So in your design, I think what you want to do here is keep working on making it more placid. Right now you've got a lot of actions. You're using so many different shapes. They're going in all different directions. And it's actually, I think, more of an excited design than a tranquil design. If you listen to my comments to Brienne, who had, I think, serenity. I'm not sure if that's exactly her word, but I talked with her a little bit about what kinds of lines and shapes can create that sense of serenity. I don't know if I talked so much about shape. I talked more about orientation. But in terms of shapes, think about that. What kind of shape could be very serene? Is it a circle, a square? Is it a soft flowing line, or something really jagged? You know, like what would be the way you can start conveying that a little bit more. Think a little bit more too about color. What is going to be your dominant color? Right now it looks like you're using all of your colors fairly much equally. You want to pick one of your colors, like one in terms of hue, like one of the hues that you think could best convey this sense of calmness, self-possessed. Think of, that expression, cool as a cucumber. That actually, to me, reminds me a bit of imperturbable. How could you really convey that? So I keep working more, maybe do a little brainstorming. Sometimes I think we go into software a little too quickly before we kind of start thinking about that. So maybe sit down and jot down a few ideas, like in terms of what color would give you that sense of imperturbable, what shape, and then start thinking about that in your design. Even I like to use music sometimes, like what's very soft, calm music could you listen to that would, sometimes that can really help you get a sense of shape too, because you start listening to the song and you get like shapes in music and design and music really have a lot in common. Soft lines, calm shapes, what would that be? What would that look like? So I would keep experimenting here. Yes, I'm glad you chose Sea Life. That seemed really interesting. And it looks to me like you've done a nice job here at choosing, I think, the color that would best convey that sense of sea life, which is blue, when we think of blue water. I love what you're doing up here with this, like these kinds of shapes. I think that's really interesting, your background. I'd almost be inclined to keep going with that, like just these shapes a little bit more. Maybe with the circles as well, like put those two together. Sometimes I think when we try to make things look realistic, it can be challenging. Like what's happening down here doesn't seem as strong as what's happening here, these shapes. So maybe just work with the circle and this beautiful kind of ribbon shape and make that your design. That's already starting to look like water to me, like bubbles in water. And, again, like drawing realistically is not necessary in this class, and it's hard. Like a lot of times we can draw a lot better in traditional media, and working, as folks have mentioned on this thread, working with like the drawing tools like the pen tool. It's challenging. So don't feel like you have to do that. Just you can stick with wonderful geometric shapes that software works with really well, and maybe take smaller steps, like again, like this beautiful ribbon back there, and see how you can weave in your design. So I'd keep experimenting, but I like what you're doing here in terms of color choices. I think it really works well for your design. Yeah, so yours is happy, and I think that there's something really fun about these shapes. They look like maybe little fish or something that's really, just sort of very sort of light about them. I like that quality to them. So I think that looks really good. And, I might just say, um, work with cropping. Make sure to pull things off the edge of the page like we've talked about previously. I think that would work really well in your design. And I might also continue to work with maybe a little bit more of some of the lighter colors in here. Maybe some of the fish could be lighter with darker eyes, perhaps. I think that the happy colors are a little bit more perhaps in the lighter area. I think you could promote that a little bit more in your design, just to kind of experiment with that. Um, so I'll maybe to yeah, maybe this little shape, I would just kind of look where you think that maybe certain, like it feels like maybe this doesn't quite belong, maybe this doesn't quite belong. They feel a little bit out of sync with your design. Um, so yeah, just keep experimenting a little bit more. I think this is definitely, um, going in the right direction. And yeah. Yes, I know. Sometimes when we get, like when we say to create something with a certain mood or feeling, I think a lot of us start thinking about something in real life. And that's a good way to think about it. But you can also really think about like shapes. What would be an excited shape? What could be like the opposite, like a kind of a sort of calm shape. So there's shapes themselves promote a sense of the qualities inherent in an idea. Um, And it's sometimes easier, especially when you're starting out, to work with that. So in yours, what I would say is, you definitely are starting to work with the excited quality. I might just work with maybe the balloons perhaps, and then maybe these beautiful ribbons, like maybe that could be your design, just a whole bunch of balloons like exploding. When you start setting up a scene, like I've mentioned to other people, it can be hard, especially in the beginning phases of working with software, to make something look realistic. So I might just work with that, like maybe take your balloons and just kind of make a beautiful kind of collage of balloons, and maybe put those ribbons in there. That could look really nice. In any case, I would probably work with your background color. Make sure you've got a nice background in there, one of your colors, and maybe reduce the amount of black or gray in there, to kind of bring in some of these other nicer colors. Bring in the colors themselves rather than the neutrals. If you want to work with gray, let's see if I've got this in Photoshop. So if you want to work with those neutrals, I would just say bring them in a little bit more, to the tone, so we can see it a little bit more. See that color? And same with the white. You work with maybe this beautiful, get some really pale colors in there. That would work really nicely. Okay, so just keep experimenting a little bit more. So here is serene and aggravated. Okay, yeah, that looks good. And looking at your design here, it looks like you've chosen serene. Yeah, so in this one, I would probably say, I like the color choice you have. It looks like you're kind of working with the greens, which is a real kind of classic choice in terms of the greeny blues, in terms of the serene that we saw in the student example and that kind of thing. So that's a good choice. I would just keep working maybe a little bit more on your composition, reducing all of the variety of shapes you in here. If you want to work with a star, maybe work with a more original star. Instead of 5-pointed, make it 6, 7, or 8, like the tutorials talk about. But maybe star isn't exactly the right choice for serene, is it? Like when we think of a star, we think of pointed edges. It's more dynamic. And serene shapes, like maybe this could be a little more serene, maybe this, and then, maybe some of these kind of waves at the bottom. So I might kind of I like the way you're working with the waves and changing the color as we go back. So maybe take out some of these extra shapes that don't really work with the serene idea and just work with the serene ones. And then just keep working on, refining your composition a little bit more. Make sure you've added color into the background here to, activate this empty space back there, and just, yeah, keep experimenting.